The radio crackled to life at 5:23 a.m. On February 23, 2019, an urgent voice came through. Mr. President, they're moving. Approximately 200 American and convoy trucks loaded with supplies are approaching the Tienditas Bridge from his command center in Caracas. President Nicolás Maduro watched the sunrise, knowing the next 12 hours could change everything. Would Venezuela remain a sovereign nation, or would it become another American intervention success story? What happened at that border crossing would shock the world and prove that sometimes the most powerful military in history can be stopped. Not by superior firepower, but by a superior strategy and the will of a people defending their home. The crisis had started 3 weeks earlier with what looked like a humanitarian gesture. Juan Guaido, the opposition leader who had declared himself interim president with immediate US recognition, announced that international aid would be delivered to the Venezuelan people, whether the government liked it or not. The aid was set to arrive on February 23rd, coming through Colombia, Brazil, and the Caribbean. To the world, it seemed like a simple humanitarian mission. Venezuela was facing severe economic difficulties, with food and medicine shortages made worse by American sanctions. International aid seemed like exactly what the country needed. But President Maduro and his intelligence team saw something else entirely. In their private briefings, the pattern was clear. This was not about charity. This was the opening move of a military intervention disguised as aid. Mr. President, his intelligence chief, had explained, "Our sources in Colombia confirm that 80% of the aid convoy personnel are not humanitarian workers. They're American special forces, Colombian military advisors, and private contractors. And the trucks contain more than food and medicine, satellite imagery, provided through Russian intelligence channels, confirmed their fears. Hidden among the relief supplies were communications equipment, weapons caches, and reconnaissance technology. Most concerning of all, several trucks appeared to hold crowd control weapons and riot gear tools for managing civil unrest, not for distributing aid. Maduro told his emergency cabinet, "This is not about helping our people. This is about creating a pretext for invasion. They want to trigger an incident at the border, a confrontation that justifies military action. The American strategy was a classic playbook, used before in other countries. You deliver so-called aid, whether the government agrees or not. When government forces try to stop you, a confrontation is created. You document any chaos, use the images to get global sympathy, and then justify military action to protect humanitarian workers." But Maduro had studied every American intervention of the past 20 years. He knew the playbook, and he was about to show that when you know what's coming, you can turn your opponent's strategy against them. "We're not going to give them their incident," he announced to his surprised advisors. "We're going to do something they don't expect. We're going to invite the world to watch." The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to secretly stop the convoy or using military force that could be portrayed as aggression, Venezuela would make everything completely transparent. They would invite international media, diplomats, and observers to witness exactly what was happening at the border. Even more importantly, Venezuela would present its own aid program. If the Americans truly wanted to deliver humanitarian assistance, they could do so through proper diplomatic channels and international organizations like the Red Cross. But if they insisted on forcing their way across the border, the world would see it for what it was, a military incursion. As February 23rd drew near, the border region became the center of global attention. Hundreds of journalists from CNN, BBC, Reuters, and dozens of other outlets gathered at the Tienditas Bridge, the main crossing point between Colombia and Venezuela. They set up their cameras, ready to broadcast the confrontation everyone expected. What they witnessed instead was something no one had predicted. At dawn, as the American-backed convoy approached the Venezuelan side of the bridge, they found it blocked. Not by soldiers, not by tanks, but by thousands of Venezuelan civilians. Families, workers, students, and elderly people had formed a human chain stretching across the entire bridge. They held signs reading "Yankees go home," "We don't need your fake aid," and "Venezuela is not Iraq." The convoy ground to a halt. American military advisors, dressed in their humanitarian worker disguises, found themselves facing not soldiers they could fight, but grandmothers holding pictures of their grandchildren, workers waving Venezuelan flags, and students singing their national anthem. The American ground Colonel Marcus Webb. "This changes everything," he said. "We can't proceed without running over civilians. We need new orders." But the Venezuelan strategy was just getting started. As the convoy waited, stalled at the bridge, President Maduro appeared on television screens across Venezuela and Latin America. He was broadcasting live from the border, standing among his people. "Today, the world sees the truth," he said, his voice calm but firm. "These are not humanitarian workers bringing aid. These are foreign soldiers attempting to invade our sovereign territory. But look who is here to stop them, not tanks, not weapons, but the Venezuelan people themselves." The TV cameras captured the scene perfectly. The contrast was striking and impossible to spin. On one side of the bridge, military vehicles, armed soldiers, and men in military gear trying to look like aid workers. On the other side, families, children, and elderly citizens peacefully defending their country. But Maduro wasn't done. He had one more move that would completely derail the American strategy. He turned to the international media and made an announcement. "If there are truly humanitarian supplies, et challenger, then left together. Let the Red Cross, the United Nations, and international observers examine every truck, every box, every single item. If it's really just food and medicine, we will distribute it to our people ourselves." The challenge was a masterstroke. It called the Americans' bluff while making Venezuela seem completely reasonable. If the convoy truly contained only humanitarian aid, there should be no problem with an international inspection. But if they refused, it would prove they had something to hide. Colonel Webb was now in an impossible position. His orders were to deliver the aid no matter what. But he couldn't attack civilians in front of the world's media, and he absolutely could not allow an inspection of trucks that contained military equipment. "This is not how this was supposed to go," he muttered into his radio. The situation grew even more complex when a Venezuelan convoy arrived, trucks loaded with food, medicine, and supplies provided by Russia, China, and other allied nations. These trucks were clearly marked, properly documented, and genuinely contained humanitarian aid. Here is real aid, Maduro announced as Venezuelan workers began distributing supplies to families in the border region. Aid that comes with no strings attached, no political conditions, and no hidden agendas. Aid that respects our sovereignty and our dignity. The American plan had completely backfired. The intended image of a brutal regime starving its people was replaced by the image of a sovereign nation peacefully resisting a foreign incursion. The humanitarian crisis narrative was shattered by Venezuela's own transparent aid distribution. By the end of the day, the American-backed convoy had no choice but to turn back. The world's media broadcasted images not of a violent confrontation, but of a strategic and popular victory. The operation, designed to be the first step of an invasion, ended in a humiliating retreat. The standoff at the Tienditas Bridge in 2019 serves as a powerful case study in modern geopolitics. It demonstrated that, in the age of information, the narrative can be as powerful as any weapon. By anticipating his opponent's moves and using transparency as a shield, Maduro turned a potential military defeat into a major political victory. It was a day when a human chain proved stronger than an armored convoy, and a well-played strategy outmaneuvered one of the world's greatest military powers. Imagine this: the Tienditas Bridge connecting Colombia and Venezuela. On one side, a massive American convoy, dozens of trucks, supposedly filled to the brim with humanitarian aid. On the other, a human wall of Venezuelan civilians, ordinary people, standing firm. This gem. It's a high-stakes geopolitical showdown, and the whole world is watching. The visual contrast was devastating for the American narrative, while the U.S. convoy sat blocked, its leaders unable to explain why they wouldn't allow a simple inspection of their humanitarian supplies. Something else was happening nearby. Venezuelan, Russian, and Chinese aid was being distributed openly, transparently, for all to see. International opinion began to shift in real time. Social media exploded with images of the standoff, armed American soldiers blocked by peaceful, unarmed civilians. The hashtag Real Aid vs Fake Aid started trending globally. By noon, the American strategy was crumbling. What was intended to create a pretext for intervention had backfired spectacularly, creating a public relations disaster. Instead of looking like humanitarian heroes stopped by a cruel regime, they looked like military aggressors blocked by courageous citizens. But the most dramatic moment was yet to come. At 2:17 p.m., with international news crews broadcasting live, President Maduro himself walked across the bridge toward the American convoy. He wasn't surrounded by an army. He was accompanied only by a small group of civilians, workers, teachers, and mothers carrying their children. No weapons, no military escort, just the leader of a nation walking toward a line of foreign military vehicles. "I want to speak to whoever is in charge," he announced as he approached the lead truck. Colonel Webb, the man leading the convoy, had no choice. He had to get out. The entire world was watching, and he couldn't hide behind his humanitarian worker disguise any longer. "Colonel," Maduro said, his voice calm but firm, making it clear he knew exactly who he was talking to. "You have two choices. You can try to force your way across this bridge, running over innocent civilians in the process. Or you can admit that this was never about humanitarian aid and return to Colombia. The colonel was silent. You could see him glance at the cameras, at the determined faces of the civilians, and at his own men who were clearly growing uncomfortable with the situation. "Let me make this easier for you," Maduro continued, his voice rising so the microphones could catch every word. "I'm going to prove to the world what's really in your trucks." What happened next shocked everyone. Maduro walked to the nearest convoy truck and, with his bare hands, began trying to pull open the rear doors. "If this is humanitarian aid," he called out, "then show us. Open these trucks and let the world see the food and medicine you've brought for our people." Colonel Webb realized the moment of truth had arrived. He had two impossible options. He could physically stop the president of Venezuela from opening a truck, supposedly full of aid, an image that would be seen by millions as an act of aggression. Or he could let him open it and expose the military equipment hidden inside. "Mr. President," the colonel said finally, his voice strained, "I'm going to need you to step back." "Why?" Maduro asked, his expression one of pure innocence. "What are you afraid of? What don't you want the world to see?" The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 30 seconds. Then, Colonel Webb made a decision that would end his military career, but likely saved countless lives. "Stand down," he ordered his troops. "We're returning to base." A wave of disbelief, then triumph, swept through the crowd. The American convoy, this symbol of immense power, began its slow, humiliating U-turn, retreating back into Colombia. The soldiers who had come to deliver humanitarian aid were leaving without delivering a single item, unwilling to even show what they had supposedly brought. The crowd of Venezuelan civilians erupted in cheers. They had faced down the most powerful military in the world without firing a single shot. They had protected their country's sovereignty through courage, unity, and the simple power of truth. But Maduro wasn't done. As the last truck retreated, he turned to the cameras and made an announcement that would dominate international headlines for weeks. To the American people watching this, he began, "Your government sent soldiers to our border carrying weapons and claiming to bring aid. Your government lied to you about their intentions. Your government was prepared to start another war in Latin America." But today, the Venezuelan people said no. Not in our name, not in the name of humanitarianism, and not in the name of democracy. The fallout from the border standoff was immediate and far-reaching. The videos of armed Americans retreating from peaceful Venezuelan civilians went viral, spreading faster than any government could control. The narrative that Maduro was an isolated dictator suddenly became much harder to maintain when millions of people had just watched his citizens voluntarily risk their lives to defend their border. International support for a potential military intervention collapsed almost overnight. Countries that had been pressured to support action against Venezuela now began calling for dialogue and diplomacy. Even close American allies started expressing concern about the military nature of what had been sold to them as a humanitarian mission. Most significantly, American public opinion shifted dramatically. Polls showed a staggering 70% of Americans were now opposed to military intervention in Venezuela. especially after seeing evidence that the humanitarian aid mission was not what it seemed. 3 months later, their suspicions were confirmed. Congressional hearings, thanks to documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, revealed that Colonel Webb had been right to retreat. The convoy had indeed contained military equipment, mixed in with some legitimate aid supplies. The entire mission had been designed to provoke exactly the kind of violent confrontation that Maduro had so skillfully avoided. The Tienditas Bridge incident, as historians would later call it, became a textbook case study in how smaller nations could resist superpower pressure by refusing to provide the pretext for intervention that his enemies so desperately needed. Maduro had turned America's overwhelming strength into a glaring weakness. 5 years later, in his presidential memoir, Maduro reflected on that fateful day in February. He wrote, "They came with trucks and weapons, expecting to find a dictator hiding behind his army. Instead, they found a people united in defense of their sovereignty. They planned for war, but we gave them peace. They wanted confrontation, but we offered truth. And truth, it turns out, is stronger than the most powerful military in the world." The border standoff had proven something many in the world had forgotten, that in our modern age, moral authority and popular legitimacy can still triumph over raw military might and economic pressure. It showed that when a leader truly represents the will of their people, those people become an unbreakable shield against foreign aggression. The American soldiers who arrived at the Tienditas Bridge that day, expecting to kickstart an intervention, instead witnessed the end of an era. It was the era when the United States could, with impunity, impose its will on Latin American countries through force. On that bridge, the Venezuelan people had drawn a line in the sand, both literally and figuratively. And the most powerful empire in history had backed down. On that day, David had once again defeated Goliath, not through violence, but through the simple, profound courage to stand up and say no while the whole world was watching. Thanks for watching. If you found this story compelling, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next deep dive. See you next time.